All right, y'all asked, so here it is, part two, some must-win games for some of the top college football teams for the 2024 college football season. I did a video like this a couple of days ago. I'm using ESPN's FBI list, not for any reason, just because that provides me a list of teams. I don't care one way or the other about the FBI or where teams are ranked, but we kind of just started at the list and started going down and looking at some of the team schedules and picking out some must-win games for certain teams. And I think I did 12 or 13 teams, something like that, and the video was about 30 minutes long. So I ended it and I said, let me know if you want me to do some more. Y'all wanted to see some more in the comment section, so here we go. Before we get into it, I'll be live this afternoon on Patreon for the EA Sports College Football 25 Dynasty stream. I'm 1-1 over there. I'm playing on the third level. I'm not playing on highs, but I'm not very good at the game. I mean, I just play it for fun. It's entertaining to me. It's interesting, and we have a good time streaming that game and hanging out. But I'm 1-1 on the Dynasty. Game 3 today on the road at Kentucky. That'll be this afternoon. I have an appointment at 1 o'clock, probably last a couple hours. So the Patreon stream this afternoon will probably be around 3 o'clock. It might be a little bit before. It might be a little bit after. But you know the deal. I'll post a link up on the Patreon page this afternoon. Just head over to the Patreon page. Click the link. It'll take you to the Patreon stream, College Football EA Sports 25. The Dynasty stream. The link to the Patreon is in the description of this video if you want to check it out. College football season right around the corner, about 3 weeks away. And, of course, I stream every Saturday on Patreon during the college football season. We hang out and watch all the games all day on Saturday. We have a really good time. Get signed up for the Patreon page if you're not already. All right, we left off at Florida State in the first video, which was somewhere around 12 or 13 on the list, whatever it was. And the next team on the list on here that I was going off of the other day is Michigan. Michigan is interesting in 2024 for a whole lot of reasons, right? And I don't want to turn this entire video into a cheating scandal video. Some information has come out over the last couple of days that Michigan may be facing some potential postseason bans or something like that down the road. Maybe I'll do an additional video on that. But anyway, the point of this video is looking at their schedule and trying to figure out some must-win games for Michigan. Now, the first thing, obviously, that jumps out to be about Michigan's schedule is the first month of the season. Sort of a talking point against Michigan the last couple of years has been their schedule for the first month of the season. If you'll recall, each of the last couple of years, they haven't played a Power 5 opponent in the non-con at all. And you look at they've had sort of an easy first month of the season. I'm not saying that to knock them. I'm just pointing out the obvious. I mean, we can go back and look at it real quick here while I've got it pulled up. But if you look at last year, 2023, the first month of the season, East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. You go back a year before that, 2022, first month of the season for Michigan. Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, Maryland. You go back to 2021. They did play a Power 5 opponent this year. It was Washington. Washington wasn't great that year. But Western Michigan, Washington, Northern Illinois, and Rutgers. That's been Michigan's first month of the season for the last 3 years. Now, again, back to this year. They start with Fresno State, okay. But then they have Texas and Southern Cal, both in the first month of the season. So this will be the most difficult first month of the season for Michigan in a long, long time. They have Arkansas State and Fresno State, but they also have Texas and Southern Cal. Now, they get them both at home, so obviously an advantage there. But we're looking for a must-win game on this schedule for Michigan. And remember the parameters from the first video. A game can be must-win to me for a variety of reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean that, this is the game they have to win if they want to win the Big Ten, or this is the game they have to win if they want to make the playoffs, or this is the game they have to win if they want to win a national title. Maybe that's the reason for some teams that a certain game would be a must-win game, but that's not the only criteria. Maybe you have a rival and your head coach has lost to them for a couple of years in a row and you really need to win over your rival. That's obviously not the case with Michigan. They beat Ohio State each of the last 3 years. And back to the schedule here. The thing with Michigan, you're coming off of an undefeated season, 15-0, national champion, right? And you have a new head coach. In my opinion, there's not really any must-win game for Michigan. You win a national title, you kind of buy yourself a little bit of breathing room, even though you have a new coach. In fact, having a new coach is yet another reason why you might buy yourself some breathing room. So I'll be happy to take comments from y'all in the comments. Do you see a must-win game on this schedule here? Now, I know, to the diehard Michigan fans, the Ohio State game is must-win every year. But the reality is you've beat them 3 years in a row. You just won a national championship, and you've got a first-year head coach. A loss to Ohio State is not the end of the world for Michigan this year. Now, it may feel like it in the moment because, of course, you want to win that game every single year. But as a college football fan on the outside looking in at Michigan, to me, the Michigan-Ohio State game is more must-win for Ohio State than it is for Michigan. Ryan Day hasn't beat them in, when was the last time? Was it 2019? Was the last time Ohio State beat Michigan? They didn't play in 2020. And Michigan and Harbaugh beat Ohio State in 21, 22, 23. Now Sharon Moore is there. That's irrelevant from the Ohio State side, though. Ryan Day is still at Ohio State. He desperately needs a win in that game. I don't necessarily consider that Ohio State game on the road at Ohio State to be must win for Michigan and Sharon Moore in 2024. Again, admitting that to the diehard Michigan fan, that is a must win game every single year. But looking at this schedule here, I guess the closest I would see to a must win game for Michigan, in my opinion, would be the Texas or the Southern Cal game. In my opinion, they need to win one of those. Now, they could win them both. I think Michigan's going to be a really good team. I've done a prediction video for Michigan. You're welcome to go back and check it out. I think they're going to be a really good team, and I think I picked them to lose to Texas and beat Southern Cal. But they definitely, I think, need to win one of those two games. I mean, if Michigan starts the season 2-2, they have really painted themselves into a corner. Even in the era of a 12-team playoff, they're basically staring at a situation where after September 21st, if they were to lose to Texas and Southern Cal, they would have to run the schedule for the remainder of the season, most likely to have any type of shot at the playoffs. I seriously doubt a 3-loss Michigan team would have lost to Texas and Southern Cal, and then any other loss would make the playoffs. And the problem is there's at least 2 games where you have significant potential to lose, and that would be Oregon and Ohio State. Again, not to say you will lose both of those, but those are 2 top 5 teams heading into the season. So I think it's imperative that Michigan win one of these 2 games, Texas and Southern Cal. I know that's not technically naming a must-win game, but again, because they're coming off of the undefeated season with a national title and they have a brand new head coach, I don't technically think any of Michigan's games in 2024 is a must-win. But again, feel free to let me know down below if you disagree. Moving further down the list here, we've got LSU. LSU did not have a great year last year. I'm stating the obvious there, kind of. Let's pull up their schedule here. Where is it? Here it is. Here's LSU's schedule for 2024. Is there a game y'all consider to be must-win for LSU? You have Brian Kelly in year 3. And you've got Kalen DeBoer in year 1 at Alabama. LSU gets a bye week before the Bama game, and they get them at home. That's probably the biggest game of the year for LSU and Brian Kelly. But would you consider it a must-win game? Maybe. I don't think LSU is a playoff team in 2024. The defense was so bad last year, I don't think it can improve enough in one season to get them to playoff level, which is basically 10-2 or better. There's going to be some arguments, obviously, at the end of the season involving some 9-3 teams and some 10-2 teams, and whether one or the other or both should be in or not be in and all that. But I think they're sort of in the tier below playoff teams for this season. They also lost a Heisman QB, and I like Nussmeier, but he's not Jaden Daniels. But anyway, not an LSU preview video here. Must-win games. The Southern Cal game is interesting. The beginning of the year, I don't know that that's a must-win. I mean, you could lose that game and really it have no effect at all on your season. If you were to somehow manage to win the SEC, you would still get a first-round bye into playoffs. Can't really think of a reason why that would be must-win. Now, one thing you would want to see or expect to see if you're an LSU fan is some semblance of an improved defense in this game, and this is a great test for that, right? Because whatever we think about Lincoln Riley and Southern Cal, Lincoln Riley teams tend to have a really, really good offense. Now, they've got a new quarterback there after Caleb Williams has left for the NFL. But think back over the last 7 or 8 years or whatever it's been that Lincoln Riley has been a head coach. Has he ever had a bad offense? No, he hasn't. Could this be the first year that he does? I guess it could. But if you're an LSU man, you're probably looking at this game as a significant test for this rebuilt defense. Don't know that I would consider it must win, though. At South Carolina, home against Ole Miss, coming off a bye week. Ole Miss has a lot of expectations this year. That's a big game for these 2 schools. LSU and Ole Miss is a home game for LSU. It would be huge for LSU if they could win that game, and it would be extremely disheartening for Ole Miss if they lost. Ole Miss has had a couple of good seasons, but they've had a hard time getting over the hump against the best teams in the SEC every single year. You go back to last year, they caught Alabama at the absolute perfect time. Ole Miss did. Alabama was coming off that struggle bus victory in the rain on the road at South Florida, where Jalen Milroe was benched and didn't play. And Alabama, that was probably the worst I've ever seen Alabama look under Nick Saban. The very next week, Alabama came back home to host Ole Miss, and it was a decent, close game in the first half, but Ole Miss just could do nothing in the second half and ended up losing 24-10. And then, of course, later in the season, they got absolutely destroyed by Georgia on the road in Athens. So they had a good year, the 10-win regular season, but look at the two best teams they played, and they weren't really competitive in either of those two games. If for some reason that were to be the case against LSU and they were to lose, I think it would be a bad look for Ole Miss. But I don't know if that's necessarily a must-win game for LSU. At Texas A&M, again, first-year head coach there. I think Texas A&M and LSU are two similar teams this year in terms of how they may finish. In other words, I don't consider either one of those two teams to be playoff contenders, but I think they're both talented teams that can win a lot of games, 7, 8, potentially 9 games. Which one wins there on the road at Texas A&M. And then, of course, you got the Alabama game at Florida. They finished things up at home against Oklahoma. I don't know that there's necessarily a must-win game here if you're LSU. Let me know in the comments down below if you disagree. Let's get back to the FBI list here. Texas A&M, a team we just talked about here with LSU, but we can pull their schedule up too. Texas A&M, again, like Michigan, first-year head coach. Now, they're not coming off a 15-0 national title season, but they do have a brand-new head coach. Now, I think, again, the game one here, Notre Dame, I think is must-win for Notre Dame. When you look at Notre Dame's schedule and how it sets up and the fact that they don't have a chance to compete for a conference championship because they're scared to join a conference, I think this Texas A&M game is must-win for Notre Dame. I don't think it's a must-win game for Texas A&M, though. You got a brand-new head coach in there. You've flipped over about half the roster due to transfers, graduation, NFL, portal, that kind of thing. I don't think the first game of the season will be considered must-win for Texas A&M no matter who they were playing. Clearly, it's a big game, Texas A&M and Notre Dame, two big programs. It's a primetime game in week 1, Saturday night on ABC, but I don't think anybody would consider that a must-win game for Texas A&M. To me, the obvious one, and I think we talked about this with Texas too, is the Texas A&M Texas game. This is a rivalry that has been going on forever. It's been on hiatus for 15 years, whatever it's been now, since Texas A&M and Missouri joined the SEC, and Texas A&M got mad at each other and weren't able to come to any type of scheduling agreement. We haven't seen this game played in a long time. I couldn't be more excited to have this game coming back. I've told y'all all offseason, to me, this is the best game of the year, Texas and Texas A&M. Not the biggest game, not the best game, not the most important game, but it is the best game of the year to me. And I think for both teams, that's a must-win game. So we'll put the Texas game as a must-win for Texas A&M there at the end of the season. Clearly, they've got other big games here. We talked about the LSU game. They play Arkansas early in the year in I guess, semi-rivalry game. I don't really consider it a rivalry game. I guess they do. On the road at South Carolina, Auburn. Yeah, to me, it comes down to that Texas game at the end of the year for Texas A&M. All right, let's continue to move on down the list here. What are we looking at? Texas A&M. What about Clemson? Boy, I hit the wrong button there. What about Clemson? Clemson, I've talked a lot about Clemson this offseason. They play Georgia in week 1, so I've had some fun kind of going back and forth with their fans. But let's pull their schedule up here. Where is it? All right, there's the ACC. Sorry, it's taking me it's taking me too long here. Believe it or not, I do know what I'm doing. Don't try this at home. I'm doing this on the fly. I need a team of producers and all that kind of crap. Yeah. All right, here's the Clemson schedule. Clemson's gotten progressively worse every single year since 2019. That's not an opinion. That's just a fact. You can look at the records. They went from losing no games in 2018 to like 1 game in 2019, 2 games in 2020, 2 games in 2021, 3 games in 2023, 4 games last year, or 23 games in 2022, 4 games last. It's just been a downward trajectory for Clemson here. They got to find a way to get that turned around, in my opinion. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole portal and NIL thing and Dabo's inability to adapt. That is what it is. Everybody, including me, has talked about that for hours on end. Must-win game. What about the Georgia game? No, I don't think the Clemson win. The Georgia game is a must-win for Clemson. Clemson's in the ACC. The goal is to make the playoffs. To do that, they got to win the ACC. I don't think it's a guarantee. In fact, I don't think it's anywhere even close to being a certainty that the ACC will get 2 teams in. They could. Of course they could. But like, there's no doubt the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get multiple teams in. If you're the ACC, your goal needs to be to win the ACC. So for that reason, there's no way I would look at this Georgia game as a Clemson fan and consider it must win. It's, again, a semi-rivalry game. Most people don't consider this game a rival. They played a lot more decades ago than they play now. They play about twice every 10 years, twice a decade now or so. On average, they played a couple of years ago in Charlotte. This is a neutral site game in Atlanta. Georgia's a big favorite. I don't think that's a must-win game for Clemson. Again, clearly Clemson wants to win that game. The Clemson fans want to win that game, and maybe they will, but I don't think that would be considered a must-win game. The goal for Clemson needs to be to win the ACC and get to the playoffs. So any must-win game for Clemson is going to have to be an ACC game. Maybe it's this first one at home against NC State. When you try to figure out the ACC this year, it kind of starts with Florida State, and then you got the Miami and Clemson are in that conversation. And I would say those are kind of like the tier one teams in the ACC in terms of people talking about ACC championships. And then just below that, you've got teams like NC State, Louisville. Maybe you throw Virginia Tech in there, although they're probably a tier down from that. But NC State returns a lot. They picked up a really good quarterback through the portal, and there is a little bit of a Clemson-NC State rivalry. Again, I don't know how much that rivalry is talked about nationally, but when you talk to Clemson and NC State fans, they definitely don't like each other, or the teams don't like each other. It's a big game. It could be that that's the must-win game, because when you look at their schedule after that, on the road at Florida State, now that could possibly be a must-win game too. If they were to lose the NC State game, then the Florida State game definitely becomes a must-win game, because you do not want to be sitting on 2 ACC losses the first Saturday in October. If they drop that NC State game at home and then lose on the road to Florida State and are already sitting at 2 ACC losses, potentially a third loss to Georgia in week 1, which would be a non-con loss, they would have to run the table after October 5th to have any chance of making the ACC title game, and they would still have games left against Louisville and on the road at Virginia Tech, which could be difficult games. So to me, the must-win game for Clemson, take your pick, NC State or Florida State. I'm going to say it's NC State unless they lose, and then the Florida State is like really must win. Like NC State is like must win like 1B, and the Florida State is like 1A. Like they cannot afford to drop both of those games if you're a Clemson man. So I don't know, hard for me to choose between NC State and Florida State there for the must-win, but I do think it's one of those two games. Again, let me know down below what you think about the must-win game there. Ole Miss is an interesting one. How many people watching think Ole Miss is going to make the playoffs? Just type in the comments, Ole Miss will make the playoffs, or Ole Miss won't make the playoffs. Let me know some kind of way in the comments. Very interesting team this year. Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin has done well there. We talked about him a few minutes ago. He's had a hard time kind of getting over the hump and winning the big game during the season. He got a big win in the postseason last year. Make of that what you will with opt-outs and how much effort people really put in, whatever you think about that. No one's changing their mind on bowl games, but it is what it is. But here's their schedule. Any must-win games here. They start off pretty easy. Furman, Middle Tennessee, and even on the road at Wake Forest should be a relatively easy win for Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss this year, and then Georgia Southern at home. They should be 4-0 without a problem heading into their SEC schedule at home against Kentucky. I think this could be an interesting game. Two teams that like to run the ball, really good lines of scrimmage. This is going to come down to probably Brock Vandagriff, Kentucky's new quarterback there that they got through the transfer portal from Georgia. He's very inexperienced. He'll be experienced by the time this game is played, though. Kentucky plays Georgia in, week 2? They play them early in the year. But that's an interesting game to me. Kentucky, a tier below Ole Miss when you start sort of ranking your SEC teams. But Kentucky has been a legitimate team the last 5 or 6 years under Stoops, right? They've gotten into the top 10 a couple of times during the season. Haven't really finished there, but a couple of 8-win seasons. I think they even had a 9-win season. Again, not winning a national title. No one's picking Kentucky to win the national title or really even have a chance at the playoffs. But when you think about Kentucky over the course of your lifetime, they're better right now than they were at almost any other point during your lifetime. But I don't know if I would consider that a must-win game for Ole Miss. On the road at South Carolina and on the road at LSU. Now, this is an interesting stretch of games here. Back-to-back road games can be a big problem. And these are two extremely tough environments to play in. They could win both of these games. I think they're better than both of these teams. Now, each of these games becomes significantly harder because they're on the road and because they're back-to-back. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see LSU knock them off at home. Coming Ole Miss, I'm talking about, lose to Ole Miss on the road, coming off a difficult trip to Columbia, where they probably find a way to beat an overmatched South Carolina team. But LSU's got the athletes to compete with Ole Miss for sure. And if LSU's defense is even, remotely better than what we saw last year, I think that could be a really, really good game. Don't know if it's must win, but I do think it's a game Ole Miss could lose. You got the Oklahoma game. They're new to the SEC, on the road at Arkansas. Georgia game. I think it's the Georgia game for Ole Miss. I think that's the game. That's the must-win game for Ole Miss to me because of some of the things we've already talked about. Ole Miss has had a really hard time the last couple of years getting over the elite hump within the SEC. They've gotten to a point, Ole Miss has, where they are beating everybody in the SEC that they are better than. But when they play the top 2, 3 teams in the SEC, they have really struggled. Can they get over that hump this year? They don't play Texas, and they don't play Alabama. They do play Georgia. So when you talk to most people and you say, who are the best 4 teams in the SEC this year? Those are the 4 teams that most people name: Georgia, Texas, Bama, and Ole Miss. They only play one of those. They can't play themselves, obviously. They don't play Bama or Texas. They do play Georgia, and they get them at home. I think this is a big game for Ole Miss, and I would list that one as their must-win game of the season. Let's see. Let's do a couple more here. Who's next on the list? Southern Cal, new, of course, to the Big Ten. Southern Cal is. Let's pull their schedule up and see what they might be able to do. See what they might be able to do this year. Where can I pull this up at? What am I even looking for? Who is this? Oh, no. That's Oklahoma. Oklahoma, Texas, Michigan, Southern Cal. There we go. Southern Cal schedule, new to the Big Ten. We already talked about the LSU game, so we'll kind of breeze past that one. I don't think it's must win for Southern Cal. Obviously, they want to win it, but I wouldn't consider it must win. On the road at Michigan, first Big Ten game, chance for Lincoln Riley and Southern Cal to make what would be a huge statement, not just to the Big Ten, but to the entire college football world, where they go into the Big House in Ann Arbor and pull off that upset. Don't know that they can do it, but boy, that would be a huge statement. Home against Wisconsin, at Minnesota, Penn State at home. That's their first Big Ten home game. No disrespect to Wisconsin. But, Wisconsin, not great last year. Luke Fickell's in year 2. I do like Luke Fickell long run at Wisconsin. It's going to be interesting to watch Wisconsin this year, too, because I have a feeling they're going to throw the ball a lot more than most of us have ever seen Wisconsin throw the ball. But that Penn State game, I think, is their first really big home Big Ten game. And Penn State and Southern Cal, where does Southern Cal fit into the Big Ten? I think most people would put them behind Oregon and Ohio State for sure. And then it's sort of trying to decide who's in that next tier after Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten. And you got teams like Michigan, Southern Cal, and Penn State come to mind. So I think that's a pretty big game. Maybe that's their must-win game right there, Penn State. What do you think their record will be when that game comes around? You think they'll beat LSU, Michigan, Wisconsin? How many of those games will they win? Can they win 2 of those? I think if Southern Cal is just sitting on the one loss there on October 12th when Penn State comes to town, that would be like best case scenario. I don't see them starting undefeated to that point. But I potentially maybe sitting on just the one loss when Penn State comes to town. On the road at Maryland, home against Rutgers, 2 winnable games there. On the road at Washington, again, I think that game is winnable. Washington lost all 22 of their starters from last year's team. Brand new coaching staff. I like the coaching staff, but again, it's almost a complete rebuild there. It is a tough place to play, but you would think that's a game Southern Cal could find a way to win. Nebraska on the road at UCLA, and then, of course, the huge Notre Dame game. Notre Dame game, Lincoln Riley's comments about Notre Dame are head-scratching. I'm not going to get back into that. I'm pretty sure I made a video about it, but the idea that Lincoln Riley would choose to do away with the Notre Dame game is insane. I don't know why Lincoln Riley, again, whether it's reality or whether it's just the perception that's been painted of him, of the type of guy that just wants to run from competition. It's not a good look, I don't think. But what's the must-win game? I'm going to say Penn State. I consider Southern Cal and Penn State to be in similar pecking orders within the Big Ten. I do think Penn State is a better team, but it's a home game for Southern Cal. Southern Cal has a lot more question marks than Penn State has, in my opinion. They got a new quarterback. They've got a new defensive staff, a lot of turnover on the defensive side of the ball. Whereas Penn State returns their head coach. They do have a new defensive coordinator after Manny Diaz left to take the head job at Duke, but they return the majority of their staff. A lot of their team returns. The quarterback is back. Really good running backs. One of the best defensive players in the country there at linebacker. I think Penn State's the better team, but again, you got to travel all the way across the country in an unfamiliar environment there in Southern Cal. I guess I would sort of circle that one as a must-win game for Southern Cal, although, again, Southern Cal is kind of a team. I don't know that there's any one particular game that is must-win there on that schedule. Let's look at Auburn, and then maybe that's where we'll cut it off. And again, I guess the list goes on and on here. Let me just show you the list here real quick. Auburn's going to be the last team we do on this video. But here's the list that I'm going on. Again, I don't care about the ranking. That's got nothing to do with what I'm showing you here. I needed a list of teams that I could go, all right, let's look at this team, let's look at this team, let's look at this team, let's look at the schedule, find a must-win game. So the ranking of these teams is irrelevant. So we've done all these teams up to Auburn, which we're about to do right now. Well, we got Kansas. Actually, I skipped Kansas. But I've done all these teams up here. We started with Georgia. I've done all the way down. We're at Auburn now. Got to do Kansas. After that would be Florida, Louisville, Kansas State, Miami, Arizona, SMU, Oklahoma State, Utah, NC State, Texas Tech, TCU. If you want me to do a part three, I guess you have to let me know. But we're going to try to take a look here now at Auburn. Let's see. Where is the barn? Where is the barn? There's the barn right there. All right, let's take a look at Auburn. Year 2 for Hugh Freeze at Auburn, but not new to the SEC. Of course, Hugh Freeze was the coach at Ole Miss for years before he got ran out of town because he got caught up in a cell phone / prostitution / underage recruits scandal. Why do people leave that out, by the way, of the conversation? With all the outrage that goes on online about child trafficking and that kind of thing, Hugh Freeze seems to get a pass on the fact that high school recruits are underage. I don't know what all he did or didn't do. I just know what he was accused of. He had a school provided cell phone that had text messages and call logs and things like that back and forth with prostitutes that were apparently used as enticement for recruits. How much of that is true? Y'all can debate that. But I'm just surprised that when people talk about that story, they leave out the fact that we're talking about underage kids here. But I don't know. Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, Arkansas. The Oklahoma game is huge for Oklahoma. The first big SEC road game for Oklahoma. They will have already played Tennessee. Oklahoma will at this point. They play. Oklahoma plays Tennessee right here on September 21st, I believe. Is that right? I believe that's right. But it's a home game for Oklahoma. They have to go on the road to Jordan-Hare, and I'm telling you, as a Georgia fan, it's not easy to play there. I think that's a bigger game for Oklahoma, though, than it is for Auburn. Auburn has their game at Georgia, and then at the end of the year at Alabama. Can Auburn win one of those? Both of those games were close last year. Now, Auburn was nowhere near as good as Georgia or Alabama last year, but look, in case you haven't been paying attention, or maybe you don't watch every Georgia-Auburn game and every Auburn-Bama game, there have been some really, really good Georgia and Bama teams that have struggled to win or lost to pretty average or bad Auburn fans. It's been a weird thing to watch over the last 20 years or so. They were beating Georgia at halftime last year at home. Auburn was, before Georgia came back and won in the second half. And the Alabama game went all the way down to the wire. Just an absolute miracle touchdown at the very end of that game for Alabama saved their season. Can Auburn pull one of those off this year? Can they win? Hard to imagine they can, with both those games being on the road. They were so close to winning them at home last year, but this year they played both of those teams on the road, Georgia and Bama. Similar to Ohio State and Michigan, the Alabama game is considered must-win every year by most diehard Auburn fans. So I guess it's just an easy answer to go ahead and circle the Alabama game. But in terms of Auburn's season overall, can they beat a Missouri or a Kentucky? You know, again, when you talk about where you're starting to rank these teams within the conferences, no one is ranking Auburn up with Georgia and Bama and Texas and the top of the league, right? They're also not ranking them down at the bottom with your Floridas and your Vandys and your Arkansas and your Mississippi States and your South Carolinas. They're somewhere in between, right? Well, Missouri and Kentucky are somewhere in between too. Now, most people put Missouri and Kentucky closer to the top of the list with Georgia and Bama than they do the bottom of the list with Florida and Vandy and that. But where does Auburn slot into that? Well, they have a chance to show where they slot into that with back-to-back games against Missouri and Kentucky. But again, they're both on the road. Look at this, 3 straight road games. Now, they do get a bye week in between. But wow, no favors here from the SEC office. At Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky, 3 games in a row. Can they win one of those? Maybe. Maybe. I'm going to say the Missouri or the Kentucky game is must win for Auburn because I feel like they have a chance to pull one of those off, whereas on the road at Georgia or on the road at Bama, I just can't see that happening. So we'll go with that. All right, there you go. There's another list of teams and some of their must-win games. A look at the schedules. Be sure to let me know down below what you think. If I happen to talk about your favorite team in today's video, let me know down below what you think about your team this year and what game would you consider to be a must-win game for them. Again, I'll be live on Patreon this afternoon around 3 or 4-ish for the EA Sports College Football 25 Dynasty that we're doing over on Patreon. I'm 1-1. So got to win today to get back on the good foot and get a winning record there. The link to the Patreon page is in the description of this video. Just click the link. It'll take you over there. You can come hang out. So you have a really good time on those Patreon streams, and it's a great way to help support the channel. Appreciate you watching. Let me know down below what you think. Have a good morning.